Hello and welcome to my Poppies and Aquilegia watercolour workshop. Thank you for joining me today. During this workshop I'm going to demonstrate in clear stages painting this beautiful vibrant watercolour of poppies and Aquilegias, and you're going to be able to paint along with me and produce your own version of the picture. Included with your workshop is a downloadable information sheet pack, and in this pack you will have a drawing guide. You'll also have a reference photograph of my finished painting. There's a suggested materials list, and I'm going to talk to you more about that shortly. There's also a tips and techniques sheet for painting with watercolour. And I've also included 2 photographs of flowers so that once you've completed this painting, you'll be able to practice the techniques that you've covered on 2 paintings of your own. I suggest during the workshop you have several sheets of watercolour paper, small pieces, but the same paper that you're going to be painting on. And at different times during the workshop, I'll suggest that you practice a technique and produce colour swatches, so you'll be able to stop and start the video and as often as you wish to, do some of the test sheets and then carry on with the video. So stop, start, rewind as often as you wish and paint along with me. I hope you enjoy producing your own version of this watercolour, and so let's get on and have some fun with our watercolours. So to start off with, I'm going to discuss with you the materials that I'll be using throughout the workshop. Now, it is important, I think, to say at this stage, if your materials aren't the same as mine, you haven't got exactly the same colours or the same brushes or paper, please don't go out and buy new materials for painting this picture. Use your own materials that you've got. And you may have mixes that you prefer, so please use those rather than feel you have to copy mine exactly. So I'm going to be using Bockingford paper. I'm using 300 grams, which is 140 pounds weight of paper with a knot surface. Now I've stretched my paper onto an MDF board. I like to work on stretched paper because then no matter how fluid the washes are, the painting will dry back nice and taut. So I much prefer stretched paper. You don't have to stretch your paper. A lot of people prefer to work on it unstretched and work on the paper as you prefer to do so. If you haven't stretched paper before and you're not 100% sure how to do it, there's a short YouTube video on my channel showing how I stretch my paper, so you can always pop across and have a look at that. My channel's Ingrid Hill Art, and it's just a very short video showing stretching boards. So I'm just going to pop that out of the way. There we go. You'll need to have some tissue, kitchen roll, soft cloth that you can use to dry your brush throughout the workshop, and also you may want to use it just to dab areas of your watercolour, so have a supply of tissue handy. I like to work on a slight angle, so I have an old wooden block that's covered in paint. You can use a book or anything to prop your board up with, but I quite like to work on a slight angle, propping the back of the board up on a block. Not too high, just so it's got a nice gentle slope. Brushes. Now, I've got lots and lots of brushes, but in this workshop I'm not going to use that many. In fact, usually I only use a few brushes within a picture, 3 or 4 normally, even though I have a vast quantity of brushes. I seem to collect them. For this workshop I'm going to want to have a reasonably sized round brush, so a number 8. Now you might want to have a larger one, so you might want to have a number 10 brush or a number 12 as well, but certainly you'll need at least a number 8 brush for this workshop. I've also got a smaller round. I've got a number 6 as well, which will allow a little bit more control. I will also be using this again is I'm trying to read the number, this is a number 6. So it's the same sort of size as the previous one, but as you can see the bristles are a little bit longer, and I quite like using that for some of the background flicky marks, but it isn't essential in any way. You can do it with your normal round brushes. I'm going to show you using a smaller flat, a 1/2 inch flat, 12mm flat, for producing some nice textured marks in the background. You can see this is quite a well used brush. And then you might want to use a fine brush, so just something small, 1, 2, something like that, for a few of the little spots of the pollen within the centre of the flowers. I probably won't use that. I rarely go down to a small brush, but you might feel more comfortable doing so. So have one at hand just in case you want to use one. So a few brushes. And I say, if you haven't got the same, please use the brushes that you've got. Don't go out and buy brushes for it. A pencil for drawing. I tend to use a B or a 2B pencil, and try to keep a light pressure when drawing on your watercolour paper. The paper can be quite soft on the surface, so you don't want to score the paper when you're drawing, because otherwise when you come to apply your paint, the paint sits into the surface of the paper where it's dented, and you can't get rid of the mark very easily. And also an eraser, just in case you go wrong with your initial drawing. And again, if you've drawn on lightly, it's much easier to take it off with an eraser without having to really rub at the surface of the paper. So nice gentle touch with your drawing. Paints, let's have a look at the paints I'm going to use. Not many. I'm going to use a nice bright sunshine yellow. So I'm going to use cadmium yellow pale. I'm going to use a nice bright red, cadmium red. A mid blue, cobalt blue. Permanent rose, that speaks for itself, and viridian. Now viridian is a very bright green. I'll show you this. This is viridian just here. So it's a very bright green. It's quite an unnatural looking green, and it's a green that a lot of people shy away from because it's so unnatural, but it can actually be quite useful in mixes, especially when you want to get a deeper green. So I will show you that in the workshop. Just a few areas I'll be using that for, with making the nice dark green. And also Payne's Grey. I shall be using Payne's Grey. Now my paints are the Winsor & Newton Artist range. It's worth saying at this stage that paints from different manufacturers with the same name can vary considerably. So a Payne's Grey from one range may be very different to a Payne's Grey from another brand, or even from another range within a manufacturer. So the Winsor & Newton Artist's Payne's Grey is quite different. It's quite a bluey grey compared to the Winsor & Newton Cotman's Payne's Grey, which is far more of a blacky grey. Now that doesn't matter at all, and I'll talk to you about that later on in the workshop when we come to pop the little dark bits on the centres of the flowers, and I'll discuss that with you then. So even if your colours are different names or different makes, that's absolutely fine. What you're really after is a bright yellow, a bright red, and a nice medium blue, a nice brightish pink, if you have one, a vivid green, and then a grey. So that's what you'll need for this workshop. I'm also going to be having my large palette. Do have a mixing area. It doesn't have to be a folding palette like this. Mine folds, makes it easy for taking out and about and storage. As long as you have an area where you have plenty of area for mixing. So it could be a larger plate or an old tray, but somewhere to mix your colours. And 2 pots of water. I'll have one pot, my black one here. This will be for washing my brush out in, cleaning it to get all of the residue out of the bristles, and then the jam jar, the clear jar, will be the one that I'll be using for making my watercolour washes, and also for in the background and on the flowers, where we'll be moving the paint about and diluting it on the surface of the paper. Try to be disciplined with this. If your water becomes dirty, do change it. It's very easy to get carried away when you're painting and not want to change your water, but keep your water pots clean, because that way your watercolour paintings will hopefully be lovely and vibrant and fresh. So the drawing for this picture is very simple and very simply suggested shapes for the flowers. You'll have seen on your downloadable sheet for the drawing guide that there's very few stems shown on here. So we've got 5 poppies on mine. Do feel free to move the poppies around, position the way you'd like to. I'm going to have one large full poppy looking towards me so that I can get that lovely contrast of the pollen in the centre. I have another poppy that is also open, but this front petal is just coming towards me, so it's just coming up. And then the other 3 are just looking on the side of them, so you don't see all 4 petals on here, and they really are just a bit of a triangular shape. They're just a hint or an impression of a poppy. There's no definite detail in here. The idea of these is the lovely wild poppies you see growing out in the countryside. The tall flower at the top is an Aquilegia. This was inspired from a sketch I did whilst on holiday. I'll show you that in a moment. I'll grab the sketchbook. And the Aquilegia, it had 5 main petals, and then it had lovely little petals inside of those 5. Beautiful, beautiful flowers. I have lots of them in my garden, lots of different ones. But again, it's very simplified. So all we're seeing is the 3 main petals, and then just the 2 from the back just showing through in the spaces. Much more of a simplified drawing of the Aquilegia. And the Aquilegia, you'll notice, is the only one that I have a stem showing on your drawing guide. The reason for that is if you draw all your stems in, when you come to paint, it's very hard then to keep a loose feel for the picture. It's easy to get in the tendency then of thinking, I've got to follow that line exactly with my paintbrush, and then it all becomes a little bit more stiff or a bit wobbly. So just the actual flower heads are positioned. I've popped in a couple of Aquilegia buds, which I will mark on your, which I've marked, sorry, on your sheet, so you know which they are. And then over on the other side where there's a few shapes, they look quite similar shapes, so that you'll have the oval, and if it has an oval with a line coming out the top, that means that's going to be a bud of a poppy. And what we'll have is we'll have the stem coming out and then sweeping down in a lovely swan type neck coming down, so you get nice movement. And then if the similar sort of shape as well, but the little mark coming out the base of it, so that's going to be a seed head. So that's once they've gone over and they're producing their little seed heads. So on your reference drawing, if it has a mark coming out the top, I'm going to use it for a bud. If it has a mark coming out the base of the shape, I'm going to be using it for a seed head. Now I have to say at this stage, don't feel restricted to the drawing, and when you're working through the picture, don't feel that it has to be exactly the same as your initial drawing. Do allow your watercolour to move and enjoy the happy accidents that you no doubt will have whilst working on your picture. That's the beauty of watercolour. One thing I do want to just say, if you have a mount or a board in mind, it's worth popping that on when you're doing your initial drawing, so that you can position your flowers within the shape that you're hoping that your picture will go into at the end, rather than having, as you can see, it's a larger sheet of paper, and it would be easy for me to carry on further out than the central area, and then it won't necessarily fit within the mount that I've planned. So do think about that at the onset, before you even start your initial drawing. If you have a mount, just place it over or turn it upside down if you want to keep it clean whilst you position your flowers. So the inspiration for this painting came from a couple of places actually. It came from this very simple sketch that I did whilst on holiday on Colonsay, actually, one of the Scottish islands. And they were growing the Californian poppies, and the Aquilegia were growing in a pot against the patio. So I did a quick study of it. Actually, this is a mixed media, so it's got watercolour, but it's also got aquapasto to give texture to the surface of the paper, so it's got more of a tactile feel to it. So this was the inspiration for the picture, but rather than having the Californian poppies, I decided to use lovely bright red poppies. I have an area in my garden that I have a wildflower border, and I had a summer with, oh, it was just beautiful. Lots and lots of wild poppies growing and wildflowers growing. So the inspiration came really from both of these places, the poppies in my garden and also the holiday sketch. I'll just pop that out of the way. So this is a preparatory study that I've done. I'll often do little preparatory studies. Sometimes I don't do the full picture, but I was so enjoying it I decided to carry on and do a full study for it. And I've used the study to work out the colours that I'd like to use within the painting, check they have the desired effect. It is a good way of practicing a technique, and that is something I will be talking to you about through the workshop, using spare paper or a sketchbook to practice the techniques before working on your finished painting. You'll see from this little study that the composition that we're working on is slightly different, and that's the beauty, I think, of working out, first of all, how you would like your picture to be, how you intend it to be, and very often it goes off in a slightly different direction, and that's great. But it means that I wanted to alter the composition before doing the finished painting for this workshop. So that was my preparatory study, which I thought you might just like to have a quick look at. The first stage of your painting will be painting in your poppies, or starting your poppies. The poppies are going to be painted in 3 simple stages. The first stage will be painting in the centre, so these are going to be a pale yellowy green. So for those I shall use cadmium yellow pale, or the yellow that you're using. Nice dilute mix and a tiny spot of the cobalt blue just to take it to a green so that it isn't just yellow. I'm using my number 6 brush for this, but this is a case where you might wish to use your smaller brush. So I'm just going to paint in the large open poppy centre, and also the flower that's quite open at the bottom, but the petals coming up towards me. I can only see half of the centre, so I'm just going to paint in just a semicircle on that one. And then the next stage is going to be painting in a base wash over all of your flowers. Nice fluid wash, allowing the colours to bleed and blend together, nice and loose. So for this I'm going to use again the cadmium yellow pale, and I'm going to have another wash made up of the cadmium yellow pale with a little bit of the cadmium red to make an orange. Now if you have an orange in your palette, you might decide you want to use your ready-made orange. I quite like to mix an orange because, as you can see here, you do get some nice variations of the colour as you're mixing them. So that's going to be the first stage that we're going to work on. So I'll just make up the 2 mixes. So I'm using my clean water. I'm going to have the cadmium yellow pale. Now you can use a pipette for your water. Oh, I'll grab mine. If you find it easier, load your pipettes if you can make up a nice wash, if you have one, but it's not an essential. And then a little bit of the red. So I'm making up a nice bright orange, nice fluid mix. And as you can see here in the palette, where a large amount came into the bristles, I've just swept the brush at the side so that it's not all mixed in, and then I can dip into that whilst working. Clean my brush in the wash pot. Pop a little bit more yellow into that. Now you might want to have a piece of paper handy just to practice this on. So it would be worth, a little bit like I did with my sketchbook, having a piece of paper, drawing a couple of these flowers on and just practicing each stage, and keep that throughout the painting so you can keep using the little test sheet. So I'm just going to dab those just to make sure they've dried off a little bit. And using the yellow and the orange, I want to just add in nice fluid mix. Brush coming from the centre to the outer petals, or from the outer petals back to the centre, but always working out from the middle or into the middle. So I'm just using a little bit of the colours, blending them together. Nice fluid, loose work. You see I'm just flicking these all back, sometimes a little bit of the orange, sometimes a little bit of the yellow. You can leave little chinks of white paper, you don't have to cover it all up. So a little bit more yellow over here. And you'll see what I keep doing is I'll keep dipping backwards and forwards into the mixes. So I've just popped a little bit more of a brighter yellow into an area on here. So a bit more of the orange. So I want these to be beautifully lively, loose, vibrant poppies. So there's very little detail in this way of painting. We're not getting lots and lots of detail for botanical detail. It's just a hint, a suggestion of the flower. I'm just going to flick that out to the edge. And then I'm just going to leave that one to dry and work on to another one. So again, nice loose yellow. Now I'm going to start at the top and work down, because then I'm not going to be pressing my hand onto the damp flowers. So this one I'm just going to have a little bit of yellow. Again, back down to where the stem will be, so the centre of the flower. Just have a little bit of orange on that one, but I'm not going to have too much orange. Just want a little bit of variation. I'm going to, certainly on the petals where you can see the back petals, I'm going to have a little bit of yellow on the petal nearest to me, along the top edge. A little bit of orange at the bottom. And just flicking that colour down. So from the edge of the petal towards the centre. So there's no detail in here at all, it's all a loose way of working. Just got a little bit of a run there, I'm just going to catch that. What this will do is when we pop the red on, little hints of this base colour will just show through. And you'll get just hints of the bright yellows and oranges. A nice loose detail. And don't worry too much about the lines. If you go outside the lines, don't worry about that. What you'll be doing later on in your picture is you'll be adding lovely deep red, and you will go out probably outside your lines for some of that. Just taking a bit of the excess off on a tissue that's in my hand. A nice bit of yellow coming from the centre of this open flower, just like I did on the other one, and a little bit more of the orange from the outer edge of the petals. I'm just going to dilute that a little bit. I don't want it to be quite so strong. So putting a little bit of water on my bristles, and I'm just going to flick that on the actual paper and blend on the surface. Just a hint of the colour. And the same on this side, just a little bit of water, just taking that colour out. So I'm just diluting the mixes. And I'm going to have a little bit of the, yellow on the tip of this front petal and a little bit of orange towards the bottom of it. And then with a tissue, I'm just going to dab over the top of any, just to mottle odd bits if they're still slightly damp at all. Okay. And then I can leave those to dry. So I've done the first and the second stage of the poppies, and I say do practice on a piece of paper first of all, popping in the centre, leave it to dry, and then go back in and add the yellows and the oranges onto these flowers for the base wash of them. So I've just cleaned my water out so that I've got nice clean water again for making my mix. And whilst the poppies are drying, I want to go in and add some colour now to the Aquilegia. So the Aquilegia, the ones that I'm painting are a nice purple, but I will just paint them in a flat purple. So I'm going to have some permanent rose. and a little bit of cobalt blue to make a purple. Now I'm mixing them in the same area on the palette, but I mix them at the side so then I can just keep pulling the colour together to alter it as I'm painting. So again, I'm using my number 6 brush for this, and I'm going to add a spot of pink, diluted pink. I'm just going to pop a bit more water into that, just to dilute it down a little bit. To it quite fluid, there we go. Just pop a spot of water in the corner as well for the purple. So I'm going to start with my pink, and what I want to avoid resting my hand on my petals of the poppies, and I want to start adding in a hint of these flowers. So quite loosely painted, cleaning my brush, just sweeping the colour out a little bit, and I'm going to go in and get the purple, and this is where I'll get a bit more shape. So I'm going to give the purple the shape on the edge of the petal. Going to bring it down and just blend them together on the surface. I'll have another one just at the side of that pink mark to form the next petal. So I'm getting purple on the tips of the petals and then sweeping them back and blending them into the permanent rose. I'm using a damp brush and I'm just going to flick that up to suggest those lovely spiky shapes you get out the top of them. And again, another little bit of the purple on the tip, giving the shape to the petal. And you'll see I keep cleaning my brush, moving the paint about, allowing them to blend, keeping it all nice and fresh onto the picture. And then I want to go in and paint the ones behind. So again, I'm just going to grab a little bit this time of the purple, to put the spot more pink as well, make it a little bit thicker. Purple and cobalt blue. Sorry, permanent rose and cobalt blue to make your purple. A little bit darker at the back. And all I've done there is I've left just a slither of dry paper to separate them. Just so they disappear off behind. And then with a sweep of the purple, I'm just going to add it into these lovely spiky bits at the top. So your Aquilegia is very simply painted, very loose, just giving the hint of the flower, nice variations. Now I would resist the urge on the Aquilegia to dab them. Allow the paint to gently bleed together so you get these nice soft variations. And again, it's worth saying, if I painted this again at the side, it wouldn't look the same. It all depends how the paint mixes together on the surface, if it's slightly more diluted, slightly thicker. So don't worry if yours doesn't look exactly the same as this. While I've got the mixes, I'm going to paint in a couple of the buds as well. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the colours on the tip of my brush, and I'm going to paint in the little buds. So these are simply painted. Just keep adjusting the colour. If you see, I keep going back and getting a little bit more of the different colours, just adjusting them, leaving little hints of white paper. I'll have another one coming out of the side here. This is the beauty of if you mix your palette, in your palette, your paint, keeping areas with pink, a little bit more of the pinky purple, a little bit more of a bluey purple, and that way you can dip in and get variations of colour. bit more pink on this one. And a hint of this one opening, so I'll have a hint of the spiky bits at the bottom. Just where the tips of the petals are beginning to uncurl. I'm just going to lift a tiny wee bit of colour off part of that one now it's settled. So very little fiddling, all you're doing is giving the impression of Aquilegia buds and flowers rather than any detail. Now that the large one has dried, I'm just going to pop a larger bud underneath it. I just wanted to wait on that, I didn't want them to join together. So just putting a blob of colour on, clean my brush, I'm just going to move that around a little bit. When I clean my brush I just dry it a little bit on my tissue, just to take the excess water out of the bristles. So I'm just going to thicken that a tiny weeny bit. And I'm going to pop a little bit more on in a moment, just want those to dry first of all. Just want to extend this one, make it a little bit longer. It's a little bit short actually. That's it. And now I can use the dark bit just a little bit on the edge. And the tip, I just want it a little bit deeper. I'll just let it settle slightly first of all. There we go. So I've just popped in the hint of the colour for the Aquilegia, but again, no real definition into these. They're all quite loose. Allowing the colour to bleed and blend together on the paper and allowing it to do its own thing. And when we come to do the background, we'll be adding these lovely curved stems in off the top of them. So that's the first stage of your Aquilegia painted. So now we're going to come on to working on the third stage of the poppies. So you're going to be now adding in that lovely vibrant bright red into your mix. So what I want to do here is I'll just move my palette across a little bit so you can see it. I want to make up a nice bright red. So I've just got my cadmium red. I've just got a little bit of paint of something else in there. Let me just whiz that out to keep it nice and clean. And what I want to start doing is just suggesting the form now and the brightness of these poppies without getting too caught up in the detail of individual petals. So on your test sheet that you did a moment ago, where you popped these first stage flowers on and had a go at the technique, I suggest you now practice your adding your red to those as well, so that you've tried it first of all on your piece of paper before you come to apply your colour to your paper, your full painting. A word of warning: if you've done your little test sheet, so you've done your little sample sheet and you've got to this stage, and then you come and you do your red and you really like it, Try to retain the looseness that you felt working on your scrap piece of paper. It's very easy to find an effect you like or a technique on your scrap piece of paper and think, yep, this is lovely, I can do it, nice fluid, nice lively marks, not getting caught up with detail. Then you come to your painting and all of a sudden it's, oh, I need to get it right, and you become tight. So do try to keep the loose feel that you had on your scrap piece of paper. Try not to get too anxious or worried about your actual picture. And that way it'll stop you hopefully becoming tighter and caught up in the detail, because this whole picture is about looseness. So with the red, so practice it first on your piece of paper. I'm going to do first of all one of the small flowers. The technique is the same for all of it, but I'm going to do one of the small ones. I'm going to start at the top, and what I want to do on here is I want to suggest the shape and the form. Now do bear in mind that you don't have to cover all of the original up, and you will be putting background around, so you might want to leave some areas a little bit lighter and a little bit brighter. So on this one I'm going to sweep my colour, probably, look at that gorgeous bright red. Remember, it will dry paler than you put it on. A little bit of bright colour. I'm just going to put a few little marks on. So no real definition here. I'm going to clean my brush off, get a little spot of water, just wiping the excess on the jar, and then I'm going to flick that colour out and leave little marks and little bits of that original wash showing through. So I'm just going to take it out to the edge. And this is where you may well get some nice happy accidents, and you will get variations doing this. A little bit more water, I'm just going to flick it, blend it on the paper. I'm going to leave that edge quite light, and I'll put some colour perhaps behind it when I come to do the background. To get a little bit more red, I'm just going to sweep the odd little bit while it's still damp on, blending it, cleaning my brush, taking the excess moisture off, and I'm just going to flick the end of that colour away. So you can see the poppies are really simply painted. I'm going to darken that back edge, so a little bit of more of an intense colour, a bit more pigment in, a little bit less water. And let's have a little bit on this one here as well. There we go, to get a little bit of a curl on that petal. So we're just getting a nice hint, a nice impression of a poppy, but without any definition really, no real detail, no defining one petal against the other. So that's a nice open petal that's on its side, and we can't see all of the flower, sorry, on its side, and we can't see all the petals. This one we can see three. So this one I'm going to do in 2 stages. So my first stage is going to be painting in the petal at the back. So I'm going to do it in a similar sort of way. I'm just going to use my cadmium red. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to push my colour. I'm just trying to make sure I don't touch that flower. So move my fingers up the brush a little bit so it's nice and loose and free. So free to move about. I'm going to put a little bit of the red in. So all I'm doing here is giving the shape to the petal at the front. Part way along, clean the water up, clean the paint off, pop a spot of water on, and then using the tip of the brush, I'm going to be pulling and pushing that colour to the outer edge of the petal. So again, we're just getting nice soft hints of colour. A little bit more red coming down again. Cleaning my brush, so lots of water in this process, lots of moving the colour, diluting it on the paper. Resist the urge to fiddle. What you're after are some of these nice little areas where you're getting the colour bleeding together and you're getting a little bit of texture. And that's what you're after in here, so don't worry too much if you do get marks coming through. I'm going to do the same on the next one. So I'm not going to do these 2 petals yet. I want to do the back petal first of the poppy as well, where we can just see the 2. I just want to put a hint or a suggestion. I'm going to have a little bit more colour in there, a bit more paint. Let's make it a little bit brighter, but still fluid. I want to pop it on. And you see, I'm trying to make sure my hand isn't too tight, and what it's doing is it's putting a wavy edge for the petal at the front that we haven't painted in red yet. Put my colour on, and then I just want to take that colour out again, so I'm just going to push the colour. I've cleaned my brush, so it's always the same process. Clean my brush, pop a spot of clean water on, and then just gently pull a little bit of the colour up. And if you find you've picked a lot of colour up, which I did there, clean your brush again, go back, and then put another spot of water on. And I'm going to have just a tiny little bit of a darker mix on here as well, so just a little bit more red. And I'm just going to make this area here a little bit richer, so a little bit more paint on there, a little spot. Clean my brush, take off most of the moisture. So we're just hopefully getting nice soft petals on some of the poppies, and some of them are going to have a little bit more vibrant. So I'm going to come back in, I'm going to finish these 3 before we work on the next 2 large ones. So I'm going to come back in and going to go back to the fluid mix of red. So I'm just going to add a spot more water because this is quite thick now. There we are. And then I can add some dark into it. So I'm going to pop the colour at the base of these. On both, they'll both be in the same way. I'm going to put colour at the base of the petals where they meet the stem, and I'm going to flick the colour out. A nice fluid mix. Clean my brush, so I just popped a few marks on, clean my brush, damp moist bristles, a little bit of water on, and I want to flick that colour out. So I'm just getting some nice variations again, allowing the colour to bleed and run and move about. I'm just going to pop a little bit more dark just at the base of that. I just want a little bit more shape actually, as I do want them to be loose and suggestive, but a little bit more shape just at the bottom of that petal. There we go. And just pulling the colour up and allowing some of this first washes to show through. I'm not trying to cover them all up. So the key to this is having your paint with quite a bit of pigment in the mix, but fluid, so that it flows off your brush. What you don't want to be doing is having a dry brush and you're having to really pull the colour. So I'm puddling it out. Take that to the back of the petal there. I'm going to clean my brush out, moisture on the bristles, and then flick that in to dilute the mix that you've popped on. So lots of diluting on the surface. And leaving little hints of yellow. So I'm just leaving little hints of where the light's catching the tip of the petal with that first yellow mix. Okay. So now the next stage for you is to pop on colour onto your large open poppies. I will be coming back into a couple of areas on the poppies that we've already painted and on the Aquilegia, and just putting a few extra little marks on it in a moment, but I want to have colour on all of the main flowers before I go back in and put any more details in anywhere. So the large poppies, on these you'll also need not only your cadmium red, but you'll also need your Payne's grey. If you haven't got Payne's grey, you can make a nice dark by using a deep blue such as ultramarine and a dark brown such as burnt umber, and you can get a nice dark grey that way. If you have Payne's grey, as I say, the Winsor & Newton Artist Payne's grey is quite a bluey grey. I'll scrap a paper here. So if I show you the artist one, it's quite a bluey grey here, rather than a black grey. So I quite like that as a colour for the stamens. Now, if you have a grey or a black that's a little bit dull and flat looking, you could always add in a little bit of blue. So a little bit of ultramarine or a little bit of your cobalt into that, just to take it towards this bluey grey. As I say, or if you haven't got Payne's grey, then by all means make a dark by using a dark blue and a dark brown. I'll just put that out of the way. So you want to have that ready for this next stage. So the lovely large flowers, the key to these is having fluid paint that's full of pigment, having clean water so that you can move the paint around and dilute it on the surface. So I'm going to just pop a little bit more water into my mix and a little bit more pigment so that really puddles out of the bristles. All of these so far, all of this I've done with my number 6 brush. I will be using my larger brush for some of the background. I'm just making sure there's a lot of pigment in this. I want this to be quite a bold flower. And so what I'm going to do for these is I'm going to start applying the colour. I've loaded my bristles of the brush, it's quite full of paint, and I'm going to start on the outer edge of the petals and bring the colour in slightly, and then using clean water gently pull the colour in to allow a slightly lighter area around the centre. That way, let me just grab the sheet. That way when we pop on the Payne's grey, it'll have some nice contrast into the area. So starting on the outer edges of the petals this time and pulling towards the centre. Now, if you did the first stage of the poppies on a spare piece of paper, I do recommend at this stage you practice this technique onto that first of all, so that you're comfortable with the technique before you start filling in the flowers on your actual painting. So I'm going to pop on a little bit of the deeper colour. I'm going to give a nice wavy edge. Actually, I'm just going to add a little bit more pigment in there. My paint's dried a fraction, so I'm just going to put some fresh paint out. That's better. Still loading my brush, so there's a lot of paint in the bristles. That's better, but a little bit more impact. So I'll pop a little bit on a petal, around the edge, give it a nice rough edge, nice irregular shape, just wiggling the brush. I'm going to clean my brush off, and then just with a little bit of water, I'm dampening the petal in places, and I'm going to pull that colour down. And what I want to be doing is leaving little areas of that first wash that was popped on of the orange or the yellow, depending on the area of the petal. So I get some nice soft transitions. It's wet into wet. It's really lovely and fluid. And then I'm going on to the next petal. Really allowing the paint to puddle off. Move your board around, make it comfortable to paint. little bit more paint in. I want a little bit deeper colour on the very edge, so I'm just going outside the pencil here so I get a really good dark on the white dry paper. And again, then I want to clean my brush off. Now you could use two brushes if you wanted, one for moving the paint and one for applying it, and then with a little spot of water to dampen the surface of the petal around the centre, and then flick the marks down to it. Have tissue in your hand so that you can dab your brush if you have too much water or paint onto it. There we go. And I'll work around to the other petals in exactly the same way. So just popping it on the edge. I'm always starting on the outer edge of these. Cleaning my brush. So I do one petal at a time, but I'm working quite quickly. So spot of water on, blending, allowing that paint to flick back towards the centre. Just trying to make sure my hand's not in your way. A little bit more paint on the edge, so putting a little bit more pigment into my mix, so I just pop a little bit more colour in. Put a bit more shape on this petal. This is what I was saying earlier about your drawings, only suggestion. I don't feel restricted to keeping within the pencil lines, especially on such a lovely rich dark colour. I'm just going to flick a couple of little lines in. And then what I want to do is I want to dip into my Payne's Grey, push it into the bristles, and this is where you might want to use your small brush again, and I want to just bounce the stamens around the centre of the yellow area. I'm just bouncing a few little marks in. So I'm still using my number 6, it goes to a nice fine point, and I'm using a very light pressure and just really just shaking my arm to let the bristles just come into contact with the paper. You get a nice soft effect of the pollen. Now if you have an area that's dry, so this petal's dried slightly, all I'm going to do is clean my brush, and then just with the tip of the brush with a little spot of water on, I'm just going to soften a few of those marks just so that they're not too hard. And I will leave that poppy to dry at that stage. So I've got some nice rich deep areas, some nice softer areas, and what I'm going to do is come back in and put a couple of darker bits on and fade the colour out, as I say, on all the flowers, but not until they've all dried off. So I want to do this petal in the same way. So this petal, this flower is slightly different. This has a petal coming towards me, so I'm just going to pop that one on first of all. I'm going to bring the colour down to the front of it, and again clean my brush, and then just flick the paint up. So I'm going to get a lovely little pale area at the top of the yellow. There are lots of moisture on the bristles when you're working on these, so they keep them all nice and soft. So I just need to let that one dry before I carry on with the rest of that flower. So I'll just finish that petal off, and then I'll leave that one to dry for a second, and as soon as that's dry I will be able to come back and add in the last 3 petals. So practice this technique on your piece of paper first of all before attempting on your painting. Try not to fiddle too much. The idea is to keep it nice and fresh and a loose watercolour, so try not to keep working back into it. Be bold with your colour, pick lots of pigment up, lots of fluid pigment. Clean your brush in your water pot, and then using water, clean water, just blend and soften the colour, and do leave little chinks of that first wash that you've popped on. But I'm hoping you can see here already that by putting the first yellow and orange washes on, we've got a really lovely vibrant glow to the poppies. So I'm just going to let that dry, and as soon as it's dry I will come back and carry on with that flower. So this, yes, it's just dry. This is just dry enough, so I can carry on with that flower again. I'm going to do it in the same way. So I'll just grab a nice brush full of richly pigmented red paint. So lots of pigment in the mix. Some tissue ready. And then what I want to do is I'm going to start with the centre petal, outer edge, giving it a nice bit of a wavy edge. Make sure you're comfortable, move your board so that it's at a comfortable angle to work. Just making sure quite a bit of paint is sitting on the edges so it settles. Cleaning my brush, a little bit of moisture on my bristles, and flick it down again towards the centre. So I'm just catching a little bit of that dark colour and bringing it down. And if you pick up too much dark, just clean your brush off again and put a bit more clean water on. And then working onto the outer petals in exactly the same way. And what I want to do is avoid the very edge of this front petal so it gets a highlighted edge. So always coming down towards the centre with your brush strokes. Cleaning my brush off. Spot of water on the bristles. I'm just avoiding that front petal. And the same on the right hand side. So outer edge of the petal, nice brush full of paint. Make sure your brush has plenty of paint in it. Give that a bit more shape. Just take it so it just comes around the petal at the front. Clean my brush, a little bit of water, and again pull it down towards the centre. And again I just want to just frame the edge of the front petal with a darker mix of red on the petal that's behind it. Okay. So we get just a little bit of a nice highlighted edge on this petal coming up at the front. and then again I want to dip into my Payne's grey. So you have to work quite quickly on these, and if you find you can't get all your colour on quickly enough, then just do one at a time. Do a petal, pop your little stamen spots on, then do the next petal and do the same. So again, I'm just flicking, just gently spotting a few of these Payne's grey marks on. It's lovely when you put these on. It really gives impact to the poppies, I think. I love this part of it. I'm just going to pop a little bit on the edge of that yellowy green centre. I had a bit of a funny shape. Okay. So the poppies, as soon as you put those little black spots on, the poppies come to life. You could see straight away what type of flower they are having those on. And as I say, I'm hoping you can see, by having the base colour in the yellow, we're getting this nice glow coming all the way through the flowers, rather than it just being purely in the reds. So I just need to let this dry off a moment, and then I'll be able to come and carry on with it. So they've dried off now. So what I want to do is just put a tiny bit more definition to a few areas of some of the flowers. Now, word of warning here, just be careful when you're doing this, that you don't become preoccupied with one particular flower or one particular petal and keep building it up and up, because it's very easy to lose the freshness that you've hopefully achieved by putting on these lovely fluid washes. So just be careful on that. Whilst it was drying, I've changed my water pot, so if your water's getting dirty, it might be a time to change it. I'm just going to swap my wash pot over. I always have several jam jars about when I'm painting, just to encourage me to make sure I have clean water about. So I'm going to start with the Aquilegia. Still have the mixes in my palette. I'm just going to use a damp brush, spot of water, to reactivate the wash that's dried. And all I want to do is just put a couple of little lines onto the petals, just to give a hint of detail, but nothing too definite. I might have a little bit that just separates one petal from another. So I'll pop a bit on, clean my brush, and I just want to catch the ends of that and flick them up. So it's just separated the two petals so that they're not both joined together. I'll just pop a tiny weeny bit more on that one. So this mix, if you've not got it still, it was your permanent rose and your cobalt blue, or a pink and blue if you're using different colours. And here, what I want to do is I want to suggest the form of the flower in that area. If you can see, the pink has lovely how it's all bled through with all three petals, but I need to give it a little bit more definition. So for this one, I'm actually going to pop a hint of colour on the back petal. So a little bit of a suggestion of a shape, so negative painting really, so that that front petal suddenly sits up in front of the petal behind it, because I've added a little bit more colour onto the back petal, so it's framed and given the shape to the front petal. And that's, for me, that's enough onto there. I don't want to have too much over the top of it. So that's that one done. I'm going to put a tiny weeny bit of a mark on the little bud. And just a hint onto the other buds. But nothing, no, actually that one I'm going to leave. I quite like that one as it is. And this one I'll just have a hint of a mark again. Same mixes. Fluid mix, just to put a bit of interest onto them. Now you don't have to soften everything, so on the Aquilegia I've left quite a lot of hard edges, on other bits I've softened, so you get soft hard edges on your picture. I now want to come back and do a tiny little bit more on to a few areas of the poppy. So this larger one here, where you can just look across and you can't see all of it. All I want to do is with the red, just going to pop a spot of water into it. Is in a few areas on them I want to add a little bit more colour. So for this one I'm going to add a little bit of colour at the back, towards the bottom of it, so it separates two petals, and then I'm going to do it so the edge disappears off, so that we don't end up with a solid area. We'll end up with a little soft hint of a petal there. I might actually also have one just coming, just a hint of a mark, so we separate or put a crease in one of the petals. So it's just a hint of it, nothing too much. I want it all to be quite nice and loose. The top one I quite like as it is. I'm actually just going to leave the top one as it is. And I'll pop a little bit of a mark on the base and just pull the colour up again. Now, it's worth saying, I think, here that your area that you're working on, and if you're putting any more marks on, will be different to mine. It will all depend how your watercolour has dried. So what you're doing really is seeing if there's anywhere where you feel you need a little bit more of a definition or a little bit more colour adding, and only add it if you think you need it. If you don't, I would say leave it alone, so that you keep it so it's all nice and loose. This one I'm quite happy actually as it is, so that one I'm going to leave alone. But on the two large ones, I just want to suggest an edge on the odd area of them, so that you do see one petal over another. So I'm just going to turn my board so it's a little bit more comfortable. And on this one, I'm going to put a little bit of the red around the petal. So all it's doing is separating the two petals, cleaning my brush, picking a spot of water up, and then losing that line so it fades into the petal. So all we're getting is a hint of a difference between the petals, but nothing too much at all onto here. I think I'd quite like to have a little bit more red just at the bottom of this one. So I'll pop a little bit on, cleaning my brush, spot of water, and then very gently I'm going to flick that out. So you see, it's not altering it a great deal, but it's just separating the petals a little bit, but they're all lost and found. So I'm just going to do the same here. A little bit of a mark, brush stroke just of the fluid red, and immediately damp brush and flicking that into the petal. And always working, if you see, I'm always working in the same way from the centre out, or from out into the centre, never going across a petal, never going side to side. It's always radiating, a bit like a clock face. So that one I'm quite happy with. I don't feel I need to do anything else. This one I'm going to do a similar sort of thing. So for this one I'm just having a look. What I'm doing here is I'm debating between these two petals, because one of them I want to put the line on to separate it, and one I want to keep as it is. So I'm going to put the line onto the centre one. I'll put a little bit of a line just so it has a little bit more colour, and then very gently flick the mark out. So it just separates, and you can see that they're four separate petals. So that's the poppies finished. I'm quite happy with them at that stage. I don't want to fiddle too much with them. I want to keep the fresh feel of it. So it's the Aquilegia and the poppies are finished at that stage. So now we can start working on some of the background areas. And the first stage I'm going to do for that is going to be the background poppies. So what I want to do for the background poppies is I want to suggest that there might be a few poppies or bits of other Aquilegias in the background. I'm going to do the poppies first of all. So what I'm going to do is I want to dilute the red mix now. Now I need to swap my jars over because I've ended up using this one for my wash, and I always have my wash jar on the right, so I need to move it because otherwise at some point I'll automatically go to the right hand jar, for the left hand jar, sorry, to make my mix up and find I've got dirty water. But you can see already how dirty the water is just from doing that little stage with the poppies. So with the diluted mix, I want to just put a hint of a background poppy. So all I want to be doing is thinking of a wavy petal edge. So I think I'll have a wavy petal edge here. Might go in. I might have another wavy edge just coming out. Clean my brush. And then with lots of water, I want to lose the edges. So I'm keeping the wavy edge, and then using water, I'm just going to flick those marks off into the background. So you end up just with the impression of half a poppy. I have another little bit just coming through. Clean water, flick it off. So I don't want to be painting a whole poppy. What I'm after is just the hint of a background poppy, and I might just pop a hint of the Payne's Grey in the middle of one. So we're just getting the impression there's a bit of a background poppy there. So very wet into wet here after the initial wash is put on, very loose, very suggestive, don't get too carried away. And then I might do another one. So let's have a look. I'm just looking at my composition. Again, this is where you want to think, if you've got a mount, where might you have your mount? So I think I might have one just up here at this area behind. So wavy edge for a petal. Imagine that petal coming down. Clean my brush in the water. Clean water. Lose the end of it. Lose the end of that shape. So it fades off. Have it fading off behind the bright red poppy. So it's fading off, disappearing off into the distance. And this is where you might want to have your tissue handy. So at the beginning you might want the odd bit of tissue just so that you can just fade it off. So you're getting a hint that there are background poppies, but no real detail to them. All I've done there is pop a little bit more colour on the end. I pressed on a little bit hard with the tissue and I lost the edge of the petal. Okay, so a hint of background poppy just shown through. I don't want too many little bits like that on it, but just the odd little area. You'll notice I haven't put the yellow onto those at the moment. I may come back and put some yellow on later on, but that's okay for now. I'll see how the background develops before I decide whether to go back in with any more detail. So your next stage in here is going to be popping in the stems for the Aquilegia, just where they're coming off of the flowers, before we start adding a lot more colour onto the background. So for the Aquilegia stems, the ones in my garden, the stem where it joins the flower is actually the same sort of colour as the flower itself, and then it changes to green as it goes down. So that's what I'm going to do for these. Now I have just changed my brush. This is the longer brush that I was talking about. So everything up to this stage I've used one brush, just a number 6, and it's all been done with a number 6. And now I've swapped to another number 6, but can you see how much longer the bristles are than the first one? It's a much longer point, and for that it's useful. It holds a lot of paint and goes to a fine point. You can use your small fine brush for this if you find you need to, or equally you could use a rigger. Oh, I'll just grab a rigger for you. So a rigger, again, it's similar to this. It's got the long bristles as the round one that I'm about to use, but it hasn't got such a lot of hair at the bottom. So they're useful, they hold quite a lot of water, and they're quite nice for using for long lines. I particularly like this brush for it, it just holds quite a lot of paint. So I'm going to load my brush, I'm going to increase the colour slightly, I'm going to add more blue into it. And I just want to suggest the stems. So again, on your scrap of paper, I would practice this. So find the brush, find some of your brushes, see which ones you're comfortable with, and practice drawing your line. So you sweep your line and they come down. Now remember, this is a nice loose watercolour, so it doesn't matter if they're not all really even, but just have a piece of paper so that you can practice and try your different brushes. You'll find one that you find more comfortable to work with. So I'm just going to sweep this one, it's going to come down. Now you'll notice on your drawing that I've given you, I haven't done the curve at the top, and the reason for that is I think it's very hard to follow curves, so I haven't popped your curve on. So I'm just going to pop in my stem from the top, bringing it down. So I've got the stem, and then I'm going to bring that stem down, and then where it meets the leaves I'm going to stop, and I will be changing over the colour for that later on. There's another little one, just moving the board to make it comfortable, another little stem to come off the bird. It's going to come down and meet, and I'm just taking a little bit out of this, and again there's going to be another one just coming off of this bud. And I'm doing it so the stem disappears behind the actual bud. And that I'm going to join in a moment with the green. And you'll see I've gone over the background flower. The background flower's in the distance, just softening the end of the colour so as it fades down, because then I can add some green into it. And again for this one, just check that's dry. And then the one underneath the actual large flower, the full Aquilegia that's in flower, that's going to need a little stem as well. I'll just take the excess moisture off my brush, and I want to have that so it's coming out from behind the petal. So I'll just have a little hint of a line where that'll join in. And again, as I say, this is once it goes past the leaves, I'm going to fade it off and it's going to disappear into green. So we've popped in the hint of the stems for these. Now I know we still have a few areas drawn on. You'll have your leaves, your buds and your little seed heads. I'm going to put those on later on when I put a little bit more colour into the background. So our next stage of this is going to be adding in some of the lovely fluid, wet into wet and wet onto dry background areas. So I've just changed my water so that I'm back to my normal wash pot. And what we're going to start having a look at now are the greens for the background. So I've done you a little colour chart. When you mix greens can be quite a tricky colour to mix. Greens is a colour a lot of people struggle with their mixing. So what I suggest you do to start with is with your cadmium yellow pale and your cobalt blue, have a go at mixing them together to see the different greens that you can achieve. So I'm just going to move my palette across a little bit. What I'm going to do is, with the yellow, if you start with some yellow on a scrap piece of paper, so let's grab a piece of paper. So you'll have your yellow to start with, and then add in a little bit of cobalt blue, just a spot, and make a green, make a very pale yellowy green, and make yourself a guide, a little swatch sheet. By adding a little bit more blue each time, you can give yourself a wide variety of greens. And these ones here, these are all from just the two colours. So all you have are cobalt blue and the cadmium yellow pale. And you can make all of those greens. So I really recommend having a scrap piece of paper, spare piece of paper, and keep making your greens. Keep adding more blue each time. Make sure you have a nice puddle of yellow to start with, so you have plenty of mix. And just keep on adding and see how many greens you can achieve just from two colours. And it's worth saying, even when your green becomes quite a bluey green, so a little bit even of an unnatural green, in this lively background it can still be a useful colour. So if we've got a mix that has a lot of cobalt in it, so we're really almost going now back to blue now, and you might feel it's too blue for foliage, it's really nice in a background like this, if you dilute it, to get some of these soft bluey colours coming through. So I would strongly recommend making yourself a guide of all the different greens you can achieve with your cobalt blue and your cadmium yellow pale. And it's also worth having a go and seeing how many you can achieve with your viridian and your cadmium yellow pale. Now, your viridian is this bright colour, as I was saying, it's quite an unnatural green. So I'm just going to clean an area of my palette out. It's just had the Payne's grey in it. Let's squeeze some viridian out. Oh, I always put, by the way, my colours in the same place within a palette. So I will automatically go to the correct little side well when I'm looking for a colour. So it's really useful, I think, to always lay your palette out in the same way. And I never clean these out. I just add paint to them. And sometimes you don't need fresh paint, so sometimes you can just use a damp brush and just take a little bit off of the dry paint off the surface. So here's the viridian. As you'll see, this is a really bright green. So quite bright. However, it can be quite a useful mix if you add other colours to it. So as soon as I add a little bit of cadmium yellow pale, it starts to take it back towards a lovely vibrant fresh green. And it's still quite vivid, but it can be a very useful colour if you want a very bright fresh green. And again, make a colour swatch, and you can just keep adding your yellow in and work your way through. I'm just going to clean that out again because I just want to show you one more little bit on here while we're talking about greens. So if I start again with my viridian. So viridian, again, nice bright colour. If we add in, it's complementary. So if we add a red or a pink into the green, then it'll help to neutralise it and take it towards a more neutral colour. So if I add a little bit of that permanent rose in, it starts to take this towards more of a grey, more of a greeny grey. And the more I add in, the more I go through towards a grey. Now this can actually be a really lovely colour when you want a deeper grey or a darker area like this, because I don't know if you can see, but you get these undertones of the pink showing through the viridian. So this can be a very useful colour, and I may use some of this in the background grasses, but it separates slightly and you end up with these nice pinky green tinges coming through. And then the final colour that I suggest you have a go with is your Payne's Grey. Now, if you look on the sheet, Payne's Grey produces quite dull greens compared to the cobalt blue and the cadmium yellow pale. And even when you go to these darker greens, the darker greens on the Payne's Grey mix is quite dull compared to it. So this is one I would use with caution. And I will only use this for a few little bits at the end of our painting. So I will use the Payne's Grey with cadmium yellow pale to make a really deep green. Now, as I was saying earlier how brands vary, if your grey is a very black grey, not a bluey grey, then this is perhaps a colour I would steer clear of, because it'll become very muddy and very heavy. Or you can add a little bit of blue into your mix. But it does make quite a nice deep green. But it is one to use, I think, with caution. I will use it for the darker grasses later on. But if yours is very dull, then certainly add some cobalt blue into that mix. So definitely before you start your background, I really recommend making yourself a little colour chart and practicing your greens before you start off. So I've got clean water and a little clean area. So I'm just going to pop my picture out of the way. And I'll just grab a little piece of paper. Same paper that I'm painting on. And what I want to do is I want to show you painting a loose background and some of the marks that you might like to have a go at making. So I've got my brushes ready that I might be using. Let's pop those down there, I don't want to get red on them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make up a green again. So again, I'm going to use the cadmium yellow pale and the cobalt blue for this bit, just to show you the techniques. And I strongly recommend you practice these on a piece of watercolour paper, the same paper that you're painting on, so that you get a feel for how the paint reacts on the surface of the paper, how easily you can move it, and how it settles. So I definitely would recommend the same paper or very similar to the paper that you're working on. So just want a puddle of green, and I'll make up another mix as well. So I'll have another green over here. So I've got again the cobalt blue and the cadmium yellow pale, but you'll see, despite the fact I'm using the same two colours, the colours are going to be quite different, and it just depends how much of each of the pigments you have in a mix. Now, if you find you can't get a natural green with your two colours and a deeper one, it's just the same as I was saying a moment ago with your viridian, because red and pink are the complementary colour of green. If you find your green is too much of a bluey green, but if you add a lot of cobalt, you can add a spot of permanent rose and it'll just take it back to make it a little bit more of a natural green. So if you're having issues with your deeper mixes, add a spot of pink, but just be wary that you can easily get to a muddy colour, so just be careful on that. So I'm making sure I've got a nice fluid mix, and then what I'm going to do is puddle paint out. So I've got a large brush and I'm really allowing a little bit of paint to puddle out of the brush. Few little areas, few marks, no detail here at all, just letting the paint come out of the brush. Cleaning my brush off, and then with a brush that has quite a lot of clean water into it, I'm going to flick and move that colour. So they're merging, and what will be happening here is I'll end up with some areas that are hard-edged, where the water hasn't touched it, and other areas where they disappear off to I might just take it and disappear that off. So it's a way of achieving a loose effect in a background without being too careful on your application of paint. And what you can do with this, I'm going to make a little bit thicker as well, and you'll see when I come to do the actual background, I'll keep doing this in my palette, I'll keep adjusting my colours. So I've loaded my brush, this is a number 8, this is my large brush. I've loaded it with more pigment, thicker mix, and I might just drop in a few bits of darker on top of the damp paper and the damp wash. And what I'm doing is I've flattened the bristles so that if I work on an edge, I'll get a finer mark coming out. So that's one sort of mark you can make, quite vertical marks on it, to give the hint of background grasses and foliage. Another idea and another mark to do, which is quite good fun, is just I'm resting my hand, weight of my hand on my little finger, and then I'm just putting a few suggestions, a few loose brush strokes. I'm going to dip in, get a little bit of yellow. So it could be leaves, it could be gaps in between leaves that you can see. Cleaning my brush and then getting moist bristles again, dampen the bristles, and just softening some of these marks. But you're leaving crisp areas, so leaving crisp gaps in between. So very loose work. And when doing this, I will dip into other colours that we have. So I might have a little bit of the pink, a little of the blue earlier from the Aquilegia, add a few little bits in. So you're going to be using lots of water in your background. And this is where you, I think, the best thing you can do is accept the happy accidents that you get, because you will find you'll get accidents in this way of painting, and you will find that the paint moves in an area you're not expecting. And what I would say for that is, that's for me one of the beauties of watercolour, and not trying to control it too much. So lots of fluid paint, lots of water, think of it as watercolour, so not just thick paint, thick and thin, suggesting different shapes. So these are two techniques that are quite useful on backgrounds. The other thing that I want to show you, and I really suggest you practice this, get a feel, see what sort of marks you like making, is the flat brush. Now the flat brush can be useful for suggesting lines or stems. So I'm just popping a little bit more pigment in. If I hold it 90 degrees to the paper, so straight on top, this can be a really useful brush. You make really thin marks with the very edge of the bristles, or you can press the bristles and make thicker marks to suggest leaves. And you can load your brush with a little bit of two different colours. If I have a bit of yellow on one end, I'm just going to clean that out and grab those colours. So I have a bit of yellow on one end, a bit more blue on the other. And you can mix those on the surface of the paper. And again, when you pop your marks on, back to your water, and then the same effect, same idea, edge of the bristles, nice loose arm, so I have a nice loose wrist, nice loose elbow, and I'm just going back into those areas and flicking the brush through. And what it will do, it will dilute some areas, it'll soften some edges so you get lost edges, and it will create some edges. So it's a really effective way of painting a loose background so that you don't become too tight with your mark making. So I suggest having a go at all three of these. Large round brush, dropping quite a bit of colour on, then using water to spread and blend them together, leaving some crisp areas. this is almost like wiggly marks. It's almost bouncing your brush in different directions, different shapes, and then softening. And you can see where I added the pink and the purple and the yellow, how you've got this nice softly blended area together. And also if you have a flat brush, to get the effect of more stems or longer grasses or leaves coming through. And practice the techniques, but you'll probably use a bit of all of them within your background. It won't all be done with one technique. I think it's worth remembering when you're doing this sort of thing with watercolour, you may get cauliflowers or runback. So that's when if you pop a weaker mix onto a wet area, see if that's still wet. What happens is the pigment goes away from the diluted area out to the edge, and I'm just beginning to get a cauliflower shape here on the background in that leaf, and you end up with a darker edge. There's a hint of one just here. Get a darker edge where the pigment comes out into a bit of a wavy cauliflower shape. I think on a background like this, it's fine. I think that's one of the happy accidents. It's one of the nice textures that you sometimes achieve on a loose watercolour, so do embrace that. So have a quick go at that, and then once you've had a go at that, then let's have a start on working on your actual painting. Okay, so I hope you got on well with your practice, had a go at the different techniques. So now's the time to have a bit of fun, and let's pop some background onto our flowers, which I know at the moment the flowers are floating. They won't be. Once we've put the loose washes on, we will be going back in and adding some stems onto the flowers. So don't worry, you're not going to have floating poppies. What I am going to quickly do is I'm just going to clean out my yellow area on my palette. Yellowy orange, sorry, because I want to have an area with a little bit of the cobalt blue into it. So just before starting the background, I want to make sure I've got all of my mixes ready. So I'm going to get those ready first of all. So I put quite a bit of water in there because there's a lot of pigment sitting in here. I'm going to clean them out and then make up a cobalt blue for in there. The key to having clean watercolours, I think, is to be careful with your mixing water, so make sure it's nice and clean, as I said at the very beginning. And if you're making your mixes, try not to have more than three mixes, three colours in any mix. So all we've had today in this has been two at the most, which has been the cadmium yellow pale and the cobalt, or the permanent rose and the cobalt. You could add the red in, the pink in, as I said, but I wouldn't add more than that. So try only ever to add a maximum of 3 colours. Then you do tend to keep your watercolours much cleaner and much crisper. So I'm going to have some cobalt blue. Let's grab my pipette again. So and have a mix with some cobalt blue in. Quite weak. And all of this will be done onto dry paper. So we might add other colours onto wet areas, but everything you'll do now, you'll be working onto your dry paper for this. Again, so that way you get nice variations, and you get some hard and some soft edges. So I've got the cadmium yellow pale and the cobalt blue, make a pale green. Just putting a little bit more pigment into it. Because we're going to be diluting and moving the colour with water, I want to make sure there's sufficient pigment in the wash to start with, so it doesn't disappear as it dries, because your watercolour dries paler than it looks when it's wet. I need to make sure there's enough pigment in the mix. I'm just going to make sure I've got a little bit of the purple. Just a hint of that I might have in a few places. And then I want to have the viridian. And then just be careful, as I say, this is quite staining, so when you come to put this on, just be careful how much you're putting on and where you're putting it on. And you'll see as I start working, I will keep adjusting my colours. I will keep coming back and altering. So do take time with your mixes, make sure you're happy with them, test them on a piece of paper first of all. I shall have just a few areas with a hint of that coming through. I've got my cobalt, let's just check the other green. Yeah, that's quite nice. Let's add a spot more blue into there, I think. Yes, that's better. So I'm going to start by popping on a little bit of colour first of all in a couple of areas with the large brush, and then coming back and using the flat brush as I've just showed you. So I'm going to start loading my brush so it's quite full. Now what I would do here is take a deep breath, think it's only a piece of paper, it's fine, and have fun with your background, have fun with your watercolours here, because this is really great doing this sort of thing, this lovely loose wet into wet. So remember, nice loose painting, load your brush, let the paint puddle out. I might have a little bit with a bit of the blue, just sweeping in an area, and to avoid that little flower. And then I'm going back to my water and I'm going to flick this mark about so that I get some soft and some hard edges coming through. And the paint that I collect on the bristles, doing this, I will then use elsewhere for paler mixes. What I'm aiming for is to leave little chinks of white paper in places and soft edges. Let's fade that out at the edge. A little bit more blue at the side. And I will be coming back and adding the buds and the seed heads in a moment. So a little area of that's quite nice in there. I'm just dampening the paper at the top, and I'm going to take a little bit of colour up. In my brush. Grab a little bit of that and take a little hint of that colour up, just so it's a little bit of a soft hint coming through. You'll notice I've moved my hand to the end of my brush now so that I'm not too tight with it. Let's have a little bit of that over here. And again, clean my brush, and I'm just going to flick and take that colour away. Nice and soft areas, but leave little chinks of white paper. It's important to say, don't try and copy mine when you're doing this. Work on your own painting. You will find areas where you want to add colour, and it will move and blend and soften in different ways, so an area where I might pop a colour wouldn't suit yours, or vice versa. Quite loose. Keep your wrist and your hand loose. I often stand up to do this. So I'll just getting a little bit of this Viridian mix. I'm actually going to add a spot of permanent rose into it. There we go, just to take it down a tiny weeny bit. That's it, just softened it a little bit. It's not quite so vibrant. And think of the colours following through behind a flower, so they don't just stop. They can go over the top of the background flowers, but they don't want to stop behind the large ones and then not continue out. Cleaning my brush. I'm just going to soften a few of those marks. Not everything. Resist the temptation to wet everything and lose all of the hard edges. So I'm just going to work all the way around the painting in this way. Now, if you have an area of a flower that's quite pale, you can use the background to really show off the edge of it. Which I may do on this one at the top here when I come over to that area. I'm just allowing the paint to come out and then just gently spreading it and moving it. And I'm just going to have a little bit with a darker mix in. So all I've done is in part of this well, is just added a bit more pigment. Just a little bit thicker. I'll just pop a few of those in whilst that's damp. So what I'm aiming for with this is movement, so that it feels like there's grasses and other areas within the picture, not just the flowers all by themselves. I'm just going to have a little bit more colour. I'm just looking around the whole picture here as I'm working. I'm just gently moving some marks but leaving some. Let's have a little bit more blue. Now, as I say, you will risk cauliflowers working in this way, but in this sort of background I don't think it hurts in the slightest. In fact, I think it can help to have a few irregular marks coming through. I'm just flicking a bit more colour at the bottom. So you can see already it's beginning to build up with hopefully some nice soft areas in the background, and I'm going to come back in and add a few more on top in a moment. I'm just looking where I'm going to pop this. And then I'm going to go, now I've concentrated mostly on the bottom, now I'm going to come up and put a few bits above some of the flowers. So I'm going to have a little bit above this poppy. So let's make sure I have a little bit below as well, so it follows through. Think of your water as your friend in this. Do use lots of water, keep moving it, keep softening, keep blending and flicking the brush. And that'll help it to keep a nice lively feel to your painting. So this petal here, I'm going to have a little bit of colour around to find that petal. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of blue just around it, so that it just finds that edge of that petal. And again, I've just put a large area on, clean my brush, and I'm just going to take that colour out. Take it away. Gently soften, gently move the colour. And keep moving that colour about. There we go. And a little bit over the top. And then I just want to pop a tiny little bit more on this stage, and then I will leave it to dry, and I'll come back and carry on over the top again. So I'm just going to have a little bit more yellowy green, because I have a large area here where I haven't got anything showing at the moment. So I'm just going to put a few little bits through. and then just move and blend the colour, tip of the brush. I'm really just bouncing the brush on here so that sometimes it's hitting the paint I've painted, sometimes it's not. So I'm not really trying to control it. And then at that stage I want to leave it to dry. And then I want to come back over and work over the top again and add some more darker ones on the top, and also marks with the long fine brush and also the flat brush. But I want this little bit to dry first of all, so that some of these colours will show through the marks I'm going to put over the top. Just the same technique really as we did with the poppies. So once your background has dried off, now's the time to start having some fun doing some really loose marks, loose watercolour washes. A lot of the marks that I showed you earlier on, you're practicing sheets with the different types of shapes and marks. So I'm going to start adding some of these in now. So let's just, I'll just adjust my colours slightly. So I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue into my pale green. And if you find you've got a more bluey green, then perhaps you'd want to add a little bit more yellow into yours. What we're after is a different green so that they contrast, and what you'll end up getting are little chinks of this base washes showing through. So I'm just adding in a little bit more cobalt blue. Excuse me, and it's just a fraction darker as well, so I'm not adding a lot more water into this at the moment. It's West End at this stage. If your water has become quite dirty, I would go and swap it, have some clean water to start with. And just remember, as I said earlier on, if you find your green has become too much of a bluey green, so if you feel, oh, it's too blue, let's just pop a bit more blue onto that so you can see. If you add a spot of pink and mix it in, it straight away takes it down to a more natural, more of an olivey green. So if you find it's too blue, just pop a spot of your permanent rose in. But just be careful that you don't put too much in, otherwise it goes a little bit muddy. I'm just also going to make sure I've got the purpley mix. And I'm also going to add just a tiny weeny bit more paint into that. And this is the Viridian with the cadmium yellow pale. But I'm just going to squeeze a little bit more paint out. That's better. And what I want to do with this one is I want to add in a little bit of the permanent rose into that to make a deeper green. So this is Viridian with a little bit of cadmium yellow pale and a little bit of permanent rose. So it makes quite a nice rich green. And I'm just checking if it's dark enough, if I have enough pigment in, because I want this to be a little bit darker. A bit more pigment rich. Yeah, that's better. But do choose colours that you like, do adjust your colours. Remember that I said earlier on, and I know I've repeated this a few times through the workshop, but I think it's a really important thing to remember, is that no two pictures will be the same, especially I think with watercolour, painting in a loose way. So definitely at this stage try not to copy mine exactly. Have a look at your painting and see where you would like to add some marks in. So I'm going to start going in and adding some interesting marks now. So I'm going to load my brush. And then, do you remember the marks I showed you before with the flat brush I'm using on its end? And I want to start suggesting perhaps a few grasses. Cleaning my brush, popping a spot of water onto it. Similar technique as we did, but the colour's a little bit darker, so it's going to leave a little bit more colour. Quite loose. I'm holding it right at the end of the handle, away from the bristles. Keeps all the action nice and loose. There's some fluid marks are coming out then. A little bit of the darker green. And you'll keep going to your water pot, softening some marks, leaving some as they are, so some of them become hard. And what you'll find, you'll pick up pigment and paint as you're doing this. And with the paint that you've picked up in your bristles, you end up with a weaker mix that you can then add into other areas. So I've got a little bit on my bristles here from the area that I've just diluted. And I'm just extending that out into other parts of the picture. I'm going to have a few little marks of purple. I'm just bouncing the brush, almost suggesting leaves. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. Cleaned my brush, damp bristles, and I'm just going to bounce it over the top of them. So it leaves some of those base marks showing through. And keep looking, so I'll keep sitting back, keep having a quick look. Am I happy with it? Do I want to adjust anything or alter anything? Where would I like to put the next area? And do look at your picture, think, is there a bit that I really like that I want to make sure I keep? And with those areas, just try not to overwork over the top of it. So again, I'm going back on the end of my bristles, over that background poppy. Just taking the excess paint off here, and I just want to put a few little marks with the very edge of this brush, just lightly pressing it on. So it's given the hint of a background grass. I'm going to pick a little bit of purple and add that into it. I'm just resting my weight of my hand on my little finger at the top. You'll see I'll keep working around the whole picture at this stage, so keep looking at all around your painting and just seeing where you may want to put bits. Is there an area that's dry and that you want to soften? Is there an area where you think, oh, actually I need a little bit more colour to come over there while you've got it on your brush? I'm going to pop a little bit more blue. So don't work in just one area for your background. Ideally, I'd recommend working on the whole background as one and keep looking where you would like colour to go. I'd like a little bit above this poppy in the top corner. And then I'm just fading that out, taking it off towards the side, towards the top. So it becomes quite soft. Oh, let's just grab that big drip. So I'm going to keep dipping into all of my colours. So I'm going to adjust this green now. I've got quite a nice lot of it on. Let's have some marks again to suggest perhaps leaves. And then I can adjust that green to get some variations. With the brush, you can use the flat of the brush to produce your marks, or you can use the little corner, the little edge, and produce smaller marks, almost as if it's a seed head. Now I'm just going in with a few of the darker. This is the Viridian mix. A little bit above that background poppy. And then straight away, damp brush, and take that colour away. So it's just helping to see that background poppy, but not really bringing it forward. Just deciding where else I'd like some colour. And I say I'm coming back to alter this green in a moment. So keeping it all quite lively. I'm just going to take that colour in just to the edge of that petal, that's better, so that it's not all separated. And what I want to do with this green now is I want to add a little bit more yellow into it. So I put quite a bit on with the green that was a bit more bluey. Now I'm going to add quite a bit more yellow. So again, this is the cobalt blue and the cadmium yellow pale, but whichever yellow you're using. And I like a bit more of a brighter yellowy green against this bottom poppy. So I'm just popping a little bit of colour against the petals. Try your brushes that you have. If you haven't got a flat brush, have a go with a round. You'll do a very similar technique. And you'll find a brush that you enjoy using for this loose sort of work. So just experiment with your brushes. It lifts it having this little bit more of a brighter yellowy green coming in. I'm going to have a little bit coming above the flower as well. And I'm going to have a little bit up here as well, just a tiny bit. And remember, yours will be different to mine. When you come to paint yours, you'll have areas where you want to have a little bit more colour, where I've left it lighter, or you'll not want to have colour where I have got colour. So do have a look at yours. So I'm just going to now pop a few longer, finer marks in. Again, I will soften some of these. I want to take a few bits up, a little bit higher at this side. I'll try not to get my hand in the way for you. And keep dipping in all the colours within your palette. And I need just a little bit now, just coming up above this poppy here, I think. It's got a little bit too much paint. If you find your paint's puddling out too much when you're doing a fine line, just wipe it on your palette. Take the excess off. So we have quite a nice lively background. I want to just assess it and have another look, and then I'm going to be putting in the stems, the couple of little leaves, the buds and the seed heads, so these will be a little bit darker, but I would like just to make sure I have a few little darker areas first of all that are quite irregular. What I'm aiming for, and what I would suggest you aim for, is not to have everything that comes right from the bottom right up to the top. Have areas that disappear off. And again, I'm just going back now into having a little bit more of the purpley mix, just peeping through, almost as if it's shadows at the base. Shadows with the blue and the purple, actually. Right, so I'm going to leave that again to dry. So hopefully it's become quite a nice lively background for this watercolour now. Lots of different shapes, hard soft edges, so that you get crisp areas of these first washes that we did showing through, but also we get areas that are soft and they disappear off, contrasting with the brighter, bolder flowers. You can see now that we need to start putting in the really good darks to suggest the seed heads, the buds and the stems, and that'll really bring this to life by producing the darker marks on the top of this lively background. So again, I've just got to leave it to dry off for a moment, and while it dries I'm going to go and change my water pot because it's become quite muddy in this process, and then I can come back and start adding in the contrasting details, the finer marks. So the painting has dried off now, so I can carry on and start adding in a little bit more of the finer details on the picture. So what I want to do is I want to start adding in the leaves and the stems for the flowers and a few of the loose grasses. So I'm going to do the stems first of all, and then I'll be coming back in to do the other details. So I'm going to go into the greens again. Let's just move that around a little bit. I want to have a tissue ready. I'm going to go back to my number 6 brush first of all. And I want to paint in the 2 leaves off of the Aquilegia stem. So I'm just going to pop in the colour at the base of the leaf. And just dampen it with water so I get a little bit of variation. And I'm just dropping a little bit more just against the stem. I just want a little bit of a darker area. I'm just trying to get my hand in your way. Again, dampen my brush, just dampen it in the middle, pulling the colour up. We get a nice contrast with the leaf coming through. And then I want to pop in the stem. Now you don't need to have a long thin brush for this. You can have, if you have a longer thinner brush, you can use that. If not, use your round or your fine brush. So I just want to paint the stem down so it disappears behind the poppy. And I want to flick it out. So I'm imagining that line. Take a bit of the excess paint off on a tissue. I'm imagining that line to come down to the poppy, following through and then sweeping down and disappearing off into all of those lovely marks that we've been making. Now if you haven't got a fine brush with a longer point, you can use a little round, so I'll show you with that one. The disadvantage with a little round is it doesn't hold as much paint, so you have to keep reloading your brush to carry on with your line. It runs out, but you can use your fine brush if you find that easier. I'll show you another one with a fine brush. So I've got the stem here. I'm going to darken that stem actually of the bird of the Aquilegia. And let's pop a little bit more of that purple on. I'm just going to darken. I'm just going to turn my board round, sorry, to make it comfortable for my hand so that I can keep out of the camera hopefully. There we go, so it shows up a little bit more. And then I'm just looking at the other. So I'm going to make these stems a little bit richer for the poppies. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more pigment in. So a little bit more Viridian and a little bit of the permanent rose. And do test your colour. Test it on a piece of paper. I'm going to put a spot of cadmium yellow into that as well. So have your paper ready and just test your colour, check you're happy with it. I've got a much deeper colour, as you can see, than the background. Take the excess moisture off on your tissue so you have a little bit of control. Now try to make your stems so that they go in different directions, so they're not all going in exactly the same way, and fade them off into the background. So apply your colour. This one I want to imagine the stem disappearing through the back of the flower and out of the top. So I'm going to have a little bit at the back, make a little bit of a triangle, and then bring that colour down. A bit of movement for it so it disappears off. Same on the one at the top, and keep moving your board, make it so that it's comfortable for you. I just want to make sure I've got a point on my brush there. And I'm just looking at this one, I've got to make sure I don't make them parallel. So what I want to be doing here is thinking, right, this one needs to be sweeping a little bit more, otherwise if I'm not careful it's going to follow the same line. So I'm going to start my colour off, bring it behind the flower, bring it out behind the next flower so that it goes in a different direction. You don't end up with two parallel lines going in exactly the same way. The same on this one. So I'm just imagining, do I have the line coming across here? Do I have it bending up? So just really have a look at your picture first of all to make sure you're happy with where they're going. So you see it starts to come to life when you start popping on these darker marks. So you've got to make sure you have the stem for each of your flowers, so just double check. I've got one for the buds, large flower in each one. It's really annoying when you get to the end of a painting, you think, oh, I've got a floating flower and put a stem on. So just check you've got all of the stems on to start with, and then we're going to add in the seed heads and the buds. So for the seed heads and the buds, I'm going to use the deep green again, but I'm actually going to use a deep green made with the cobalt blue and the cadmium yellow pale, because I want it to have a little bit more of a yellowy tinge first of all. And then either using a small brush your number 6 brush, whichever you find comfortable. We're going to start adding in the buds and the seed heads. So if we start off with a seed head, we'll have the little shape, so we'll have a little oval. I'm just going to paint in the oval to start with. And then I want to continue the line, so I'm just going to catch the line, bring it down so it comes down into the background. I'm going to dip into the dark mix and add a little bit of that in as well. And then paint the same on another. In a moment I'm going to put a little spot on the top. Have like a little brown spot on the top. And fade off into the background. Remember, they don't all need to come right to the base. It's lovely when you start adding these darker bits in on top. And I'm always taking the dark just down into the stem. And look around your picture and decide where you would like them. So you may want more or less seed heads than your original drawing. And you may find you can't see your original drawing seed heads, which is absolutely fine. It's not a problem. Just have a look around and decide where you might like some of them to go. So I think I might have another one down here at the side. So I'm just going to move my board, pop a little oval in. Take a little bit of the paint off. And then just pop in a little bit of that darker green, the Viridian mix. And what I want to do is add in the buds next. So again, I'm going to use the yellowy mix. I'm actually going to just pop a little bit more yellow into that. And I'm going to make sure I've got some that peep out. So I'm going to have a little one peeping out the side of one of the poppies. So I'm going to do it on the centre poppy. So I'm going to pop in a little oval. Just move my hand so you can see. I'm going to have a little bud, is a little oval, just disappearing behind a petal. And then what I need to do is imagine the stem is coming out and curving down. So what you have an oval for the bud, and then you'll have the stem coming up, swan neck, coming down. So I want to imagine that swan neck is coming out from behind the poppy's petal. So I'm just going to load my brush again. I just want to make sure there's enough pigment in here because I don't want to have to paint the line in, ideally. I'm going to load my brush. Practice your lines, practice your technique on a piece of paper. Now you need to have enough moisture in the wash for it to flow off of the bristles, and move your board to make it comfortable. I've got a little hair there, let me just take that off. And then that's just going to sweep down. Just want to make sure it's really shown up, so I'm just popping a little bit of dark just on the tip. I'll choose another area. So I definitely would like one higher up. I'm just putting a little bit of water, a bit of the wash, puddling it at the bottom, so it'll settle with a slightly darker tone at the base of the bud. And then this is why you didn't want to draw your stems in, because otherwise it'd be very hard to follow them. Bring your stem round, a nice curve, and sweep back. Imagine it going through the flower and out the other side. Through the flower, out the other side. I'm just going to pop a bit more paint in again, because I need a little bit of moisture in that wash to make sure it's fluid. So because I've added water, I need to add paint. I'm going to have another one at the bottom. And this one's going to go up behind the flower above it and then come down. And again, I'm just puddling a little bit of dark paint at the bottom, just for it to settle at the base so it becomes a little bit darker as it dries. So have a look at your picture, decide, do I need anything anywhere else? Is there anywhere I'd like another spot? And I'd quite like to have another couple of Aquilegia marks, or at least one more, I think, showing through. So I'm going to get the purple mix. I'm just going to reactivate that. It's just dried a little bit. Let's just move that round. So just adding a bit more colour into there. And I'm going to have a little bit that's going to peep out. Imagining the stem of the Aquilegia is there, so I think I might just have a hint of a bud peeping out behind this poppy. So you get a little bit of it coming through. And I'm just looking, is there anywhere else that I would like another little bit to show? And I think I might have a little bit coming out to the side, as if there's a petal from one of the flowers just peeping out the edge. And I'll have another little bit of one, just so that you get a hint of a flower showing through. Not too dark, so they just fade off. So I've just dabbed them with the tissue a little bit. In fact, while I have got that dark mix, I'm looking at my painting, and this is what I suggest you always do. Have a look at your picture, and I think I would quite like to darken the little petal at the back a little bit more, just at the top of it. So I'll use that darker mix. There we go. Just to really push it underneath. So I've just popped a little bit on, just at the very top of it. That's better. It just needs a little bit more shadow onto there. And I also want to use that dark on the little petals at the side, on the bud that's opening. Just so it's got a hint more interest onto it. So I want to pop in a little spot on the top of the buds. So I'm just going to use a little bit of my red, And into that, just going to add some of the cadmium yellow pale to make an orange, and a little bit of the cobalt blue to make a brown. If you have your complementary colours, they'd neutralise, as I mentioned earlier. So if you have a yellow and a red, and you make an orange, just make an orange on the paper. If you then add the complementary colour in of the orange, which is a blue, if you add blue onto here, it'll start to neutralise it, and it'll go towards a brown or a green. I've got a little bit more yellow into mine, so if I add a little bit more red to make it more of an orange, you go through to a brown. So I'm just going to use that mix to pop a spot in on the top of them. So that's cadmium red, cadmium yellow pale, sorry, and a little bit of a blue, cobalt blue, and it just makes a brown. So again, I just want to make sure those little bits are dry. I don't want to smudge those little spots and the buds particularly. So whilst that's happening, I want to just clean out my an area in my palette. I'm going to clean the blue out because I want to make a much darker green. I mentioned earlier on about making a really good dark green with Payne's grey and a yellow, cadmium yellow pale. So I'm going to show you this now. Let me just squeeze some fresh paint out because I want a good dark. So to have a good dark, I want to have fresh paint in my palette to dip into. The yellow still, I've still got nice moist yellow on there. So if I have Payne's grey and cadmium yellow pale, it will make a really good dark green. I want it to be fluid for what I'm doing, so I want to have a lot of pigment but also moisture in the bristles in the wash so that it'll flow, but you'll see it makes a really good, really intense dark green. Now if you find it is too dull, you can always add in a little bit of cobalt blue and that will take it back towards more of a bluey green. Or equally, if you would rather, you could use your cobalt blue and your cadmium yellow pale. I'll just make one to show you here. So I'm just putting quite a bit of it in. And a spot of your permanent rose. Just adjusting that to show you. You can do a similar sort of colour with those as well. So have a go with either. So I want to start popping in the darker grasses. I'm just having a very quick look round before I do because they're the final stages, so I just want to be sure that I'm happy with the whole picture. So have a look at your painting, check if there's anywhere that you want to alter or adjust your colours or add any more of the background marks before you start putting in these final harder, darker marks on top. And there's only one area on my picture that I feel I'd like to add a little bit more colour, and it's just here. I feel there's a little bit of a light patch above that nice bright poppy. So before I put the darks in, I am actually going to pop a little bit of colour up there. So I'm going to grab a little bit of a yellowy green and I'm going to pop a little bit of it over the top of this poppy, behind the bud slightly. Clean my brush and I want to fade that out a little bit so it disappears off. That's better. There was just a patch there that was a little bit too pale with nothing on it, so it just needed a hint of some colour in that area. So I'm just going to avoid that bit while I put the background grasses on. I must remind myself it's there before I paint over the top of it while it's wet. So I'm going to start adding in a few darker marks. So the idea for this is nice loose marks. Try not to get too tight. Don't feel you have to start from the bottom, go to the top. I want to do some nice flicky, contrasty marks, a few dots and dashes. Stippling the brush, just allowing it to hit the surface of the paper. I suggest perhaps seed heads. And just the odd bit I will soften, but not very much at all. I want most of this to be a little bit more hard. A few little dashes coming across. I'm going to do that one coming over the top of this poppy. Little spots. So we're really putting a little bit of contrast onto this now with this darker mix. And I will have to keep adding into this dark mix because as I'm diluting it, if I wash my brush or soften an area, I dilute the mix. So I will keep adjusting it all the time for this part. I must avoid that. I must remind myself that's still wet, so let's not go into that bit. And then I'll have a couple coming across. So the little spots on the end I think really help to give a wild feel to it, wildflower area grasses. And keep looking, I'm always looking around the whole picture, just checking, am I happy? Do I need to alter it? Do I need to add any more? So again, I'm just adding a little bit more painting. I want this to be nice and dark. I don't want it to dry and disappear because watercolour dries paler than it is whilst damp. I don't want this to disappear off. I'll just leave that little bit a moment. I'd like a little bit to be coming behind these at the top. I'm just taking the excess off on my tissue. And I just want to bounce my brush just over a couple of those. So I'm cleaning the wash out, taking the excess moisture off the bristles, and then just bouncing it across so that some of them become a little bit softer and some of them stay lovely and hard. I want them to come past that poppy. I don't know if you can hear, the wind's just really got up outside the studio. It's suddenly really blowing. Okay. Yeah, lovely. So I just now want to bring that stem so it disappears down. And I'm looking at the whole painting, just seeing if there's anywhere else that I would like any. I'd like something on this side as well. So I'm just going to move the board. I quite like the way they're all coming across to this side slightly, so I'm going to carry on with that idea, but not making them parallel. That can go behind that poppy. And I'd like just a couple of little bits at the side as well, so I'm just diluting it fractionally as I come across. This whole side is slightly paler, so I don't want it to be quite so dark. So it just becomes a little bit more of a soft area. So I'm quite happy with the painting. I'm just having a look at it as a whole now, and I think I need a little bit of a pale grass over right at this far side, and also I quite like a little bit just to come above the Aquilegia, and they will be my finishing marks. So have a look at your picture, decide, have you finished it? Is there anywhere else that you need to have a little bit of a colour, a little bit of more background texture, and just keep looking at it periodically. Don't just keep on going continuously, just keep checking. So this one, I'm just softening this at the edge. I don't want this to be too bold at the side, so I'm just running a damp brush over parts of it to allow parts of it to soften. So all I've got here is a little bit of the moisture on my bristles from softening the previous mark, which means it's all quite pale. So I'm quite happy with that side now, and as I say, I just feel like I need a little bit coming up behind the Aquilegia. And I don't want it to be too dark. So I'm just making the mine a little bit more of a yellow. If I was going to carry on painting, I must change my water at this stage, but for this last little bit, it's fine. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the yellow across. I'm just putting a few little bits of touch. I've just splayed the bristles slightly on the brush. That's better. I'm just taking a little bit of the dark in as well. There we go. That's better. It just leads the picture in, I feel, a little bit more. I need a little bit at the top. So I'm quite happy with it. I feel that it's nice and lively. It's got a lively background. It's quite loose, which is the aim of the watercolour that I was painting. So at this stage now I would want to pop them out on. Let's just rub them out and place it over the top and just have a look. And I would always have a few mounts, so I always have a few handy in the studio, lay it over the picture, and then I can decide, is it finished? Do I need to add any more into it? And I'm quite happy with that. I hope you've enjoyed following this loose watercolour workshop and that you've enjoyed painting your own version of these wildflowers. I'd love to see your pictures, so when you've completed it, do send me a picture. It'd be great to see your own version of the watercolour painting, but thank you very much for joining me today.